Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to today's Partner Infopedia web conference titled Envisioning Business Use Cases. We're finishing some last-minute preparations for our show and we'll be getting started shortly. Just wanted to let you know that we are here and we're getting ready to go. We'll be getting started shortly, so go ahead and sit back, relax, and we'll be back with you in just a moment. Hello and welcome again to today's Partner Infopedia web conference titled Envisioning Business Use Cases. We are broadcasting this web conference via Skype meeting broadcast and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. If you do not consent to being part of a recorded session, we ask that you please disconnect your browser at this time. Attendees may access the web conference recording via a link that will be delivered within 72 hours post-conference. You may ask a question at any time using the Q&A panel located either to the right of your screen or by scrolling down to just below the video pane. Our presenters are going to be responding to your questions throughout the presentation and again at the end of the presentation during a formal Q&A. Lastly, if you experience any technical difficulties during today's web conference, first try refreshing your web browser by pressing the F5 key. If that doesn't work for you, you'll want to go ahead and click on the support link at the top right corner of your browser. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with our show. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Principal Customer Engineering Architect, Lester Hewitt. So Lester, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Janice. Welcome to the Skype Operations Framework Business Use Case session. This is part of the wider Skype Operations Framework training. Over the next 60 minutes, we'll introduce you to the business use case activity that takes part as part of our envisioning. So a little bit about me. My name is Lester Hewitt, as I said, the Principal Customer Engineering Architect in the Skype Customer Experience and Deployment team. So our team is part of the Skype for Business product group, and our team works with customers and partners to enhance their experience by capturing feedback to influence product direction, while enabling organizations of any size to get to our cloud service by providing best-in-class readiness and deployment services. And part of that readiness is the whole Skype Operations Framework. So let's just have a quick recap about Skype Operations Framework itself. As I said, this session is part of the wider Skype Operations Framework training, and we strongly encourage you to review the Skype Operations Framework overview recorded training if you haven't done so already. So for those folks who may not have seen that so far, let's start this session by quickly recapping why we created Skype Operations Framework, what it is, and some of the multifaceted components of this. So the shift to the cloud, which is something that we'll talk about quite often, changes the way that Skype for Business is delivered, moving from on-premises deployments to online deliveries. And we've been asked to provide practical guidance to assist with planning, delivering, and operating Skype for Business online. We created this multifaceted approach of the Skype operational framework to provide that practical guidance with associated tools and assets, along with a common language of phases and stages to help drive a common understanding of the Skype for Business online lifecycle. To help folks get on board, we have the Skype Academy to host sessions like this one, and also technical product training. And finally, we have feedback mechanisms where we're going to ask you to provide feedback. So one thing I would say about the Skype Operations Framework, it is very much a living framework. We are working on updates on a regular basis. So please feel free, come back to skypeoperationsframework.com on a regular basis to get the latest material. And as we said, this is very much a living, breathing framework. And one of the things that really helps us when we consider how we update our assets is around feedback. So one of the things that we really ask is for provide feedback, tell us what works and what doesn't, point out things that you feel maybe need a little bit of tweaking. Very happy to hear from you what you feel might be missing or any other feedback. So let us know on the link below, which is Skype Operations Framework/feedback. The nice thing about using this feedback channel is that if you look at the feedback that's provided and you find that's something that actually you're quite interested as well, you can vote on that feedback to show your support. And it really helps us understand which ideas and which feedback items have got resonance among the community. So when we think about the training itself in the context of that living framework, one of the things I would say is that please feel free to come back, update them, have access to the updated materials, and be aware that this is kind of version 1.0 of this training. So over time, we will update the assets and materials. When we get to a major change, we'll update the training. If you get to the materials, you might find that they're slightly enhanced from the materials that you look at, depending on how long after the recording you're viewing this material. So with the intros done, let's spend a little bit of time thinking about the learning objectives, what it is that we basically hope to achieve as part of this training. So we want to start by discussing the benefits of running the business use case workshop. So what do you get from it? What does the project get from it? What do the end users get from it? Let's be really clear about why it is that we're spending time to understand this use case workshop and actually deliver it within our projects. Then let's think about when we engage with this business use case workshop. Where in the Skype for Business online lifecycle, that wheel of Skype Operations Framework you see on the right, where do we engage? I want you to become very comfortable with how to prepare for and deliver these workshops. And also I want to make sure that you know where to go to download the materials and provide feedback on our environment. So hopefully those are the main 4 learning objectives that you'll be coming away with at the end of this session today. The agenda. We're going to cover off, as I said, an initial exploration about why run the business use case workshop. We want to talk about the prerequisites. What should you do before you start to engage? We want to introduce the concept of these business use cases. What are they? What do we capture? What level are we working at? We'll talk about what you do to prepare for the session, how to run through the workshop delivery using the actual delivery materials that you'll download from skypeoperationsframework.com. Look at what you follow up, and then we'll finish off with just some launch materials, feedback, and also a sort of 10-minute Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions as we're going through, please feel free to end them in the Q&A window, and we will work through them through the session and also summarize them at the end. So let's spend a bit of time thinking about why we run the business use case workshop and what is it that we're looking at. So when we engage with customers, they often tell us that the opportunity to drive innovation and business benefit exists when they look at their existing interactions and processes and consider how to apply new Skype for Business online workloads and capabilities to those business processes. For example, that might be maybe they're looking at customer service improvements. Maybe they're focusing at how distributed project teams work, or even HR interviewing new staff. We know that all of these processes have been improved by applying Skype for Business capabilities and unlocking business benefits. And the key here, when working in our projects, is taking the time to understand how this new set of capabilities will actually deliver benefits for the end user groups and the organizations. When we engage in this workshop, we find that the business users will come up with really innovative ways to improve existing processes or interactions. They'll be able to describe these in the ways that are very personal to that user or that business unit. And our findings are that that personal point of view means that people can relate to this as the capability is put into context of their job and how this will benefit them. So when we think about engaging in Skype for Business online projects, we need to consider which users will we target, how users will use the new capabilities, what are the measurable benefits that users will gain, and how do we explain the benefits that the new system will deliver in terms that resonate with the users. To achieve this, it is important that we engage correctly at the right level in the organization with a sponsor who can target which business units to work with and create that initial connection to prioritize engagement. So let's focus a little bit more on why this activity is important for the project and why you should undertake it. In our experience, it is one of the key methods to gain sponsorship and buy-in across the business, and can even assist with securing budget because you're creating a vision for how improvements will manifest and the benefits that business units will see. This changes the interaction, and we see many examples where the business is now asking for these services in a pull model and actively driving demand, rather than IT going to the business and having to work to push this new capability. And we also find it easier for you to have a number of conversations when we have the actual formal business backing and reasons when we're asking for change, whether that's in a change advisory board, whether that's to do with networks, whether that's to do with client configurations. We find that many people on this call will have had interesting discussions with security networking client teams about ports, configurations, you name it. And our experience is that these conversations are much more focused when it's clear that the business needs this capability and it's aligned to company strategy, rather than this being an IT-only initiative. So really, from the point of view of why engage this, is to get a much better understanding of how this technology will be used by the business units. It really drives increased connectivity to sponsorship and business buy-in. It helps to move from a demand model, from push, not pull. And it really also creates a very powerful context to have conversations for the rest of the program. So let's dig a little bit more into what are we actually doing during this session to generate these benefits. So what we're really looking at here is gaining valuable insights into how this technology change will really drive change in the organization, and that those insights will be leveraged during planning, reporting, and adoption activities. And this enables really the project team to see the impact of the delivery through the business user's eyes, and provide insights when talking to other business units as to how they may use this type of technology, helping to land the delivery through a common understanding. So we use the term business use case here to define a high-level view of how a particular part of the business will use Skype for Business Online in the context of enhancement to their processes, to deliver business benefits, describing the current process, the perceived issues, and then looking at how applying new Skype for Business Online workloads and capabilities to those business processes can drive measurable business benefits. We use the term business use case, but you may also consider the term user stories or scenarios. The key here is that we recommend you engage with business representatives to drive these sessions. So business use cases will be used to share the user and business benefits during the Skype for Business Online lifecycle and leveraged during a number of the follow-on stages, including adoption planning. So hopefully you're now getting a feel for that this is very much an interaction between the project team and the business users within the organization, rather than between the project team and IT directly. We're trying to expand the conversation that people are having and make sure we're really getting that kind of personal touch and that what does it mean for me aspect being brought onto the table when we're starting to talk about this technology change. Let's have a little think around some of the prerequisites. What is it that basically we need to do to get to being able to execute this type of engagement? So when we engage, we're going to be working with business units rather than direct with IT. So our experience is you'll need to prepare for those conversations and also ensure that you get traction with your sponsor and key stakeholders. Now, these are key to gain access and time in business units' diary for the session, especially since we actually want to have people in the room for this type of engagement. So the sessions and materials in this session will help in that preparation. So one of the first things we need to understand is the high-level business goals. What is it that the organization is looking to achieve by deploying Skype for Business Online? Now, if you've already started the SOF envisioning process, you already have a good understanding through the high-level business goals and outcomes. You'll have discussed those already as part of envisioning, and they understand what's expected from the project. If you've not engaged yet or derived those high-level business goals, now would be a good time to have that initial conversation so that you can frame the conversation around the business use case engagement. It's also a good time to undertake some investigation into the company structure to help target business units to engage. And as part of your preparation, it's going to be key to identify the project sponsor and key stakeholders who will work with you to gain access and time in business users' diaries for the session. So, a couple of things that are kind of useful from here. One of the tips and tricks that you might find useful with this is that we found in many cases that the organization that owns and runs ERP or CRM inside an organization probably already has good relations across the business units. And that's maybe a good place to start about looking for business people who might take part in some of these sessions. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about the format of these business use cases. What is it that we're actually looking to capture as we work with our business users? So the key and the thing I'd like to keep in mind when we're thinking about creating these business use cases is that we are not looking at getting into depth here. We want to discover enough about the processes and discover a level of the expected measurable business outcome. And that's key to making this real for business units. So what we want to do is we start by looking at the components of the captured biz case, and then we'll look at a completed sample on the next slide. So when we have these conversations, what we're starting off is we're starting by capturing a current business process as one headline. And maybe we have 2 or 3 key bullet points. That's the level of detail we're looking to get here. So we're looking for the essence of the business process activity. We're looking to understand what is being done and who undertakes this. And we know that any business has many, many processes, and we're not looking to cover them all here in one workshop. The preparation you will undertake with the business units is designed to stimulate pre-selecting a couple of processes for investigation during the workshop. So once we have this outline of the process, what is it that people are currently doing today? And it may be interviewing people via HR. It may be supporting an assembly line. It may be dealing with a large outdoor broadcast. There's some examples we'll talk through later on. We now need to have an understanding of what are the current challenges. What is it that makes that difficult? What's it hard for them to execute? What doesn't scale? What might be frustrating? And we're looking for areas where communication technologies may be lacking or not easy to undertake or to understand. Then what we're doing is we are painting a picture together with the business units of how this process could be transformed if we apply the capabilities of Skype for Business Online. And the trick here is to consider replaying the process and looking to see how the communication and collaboration capabilities of Skype for Business Online, both internally and externally, could be brought to bear to drive improvements. Now, at this point, we're not expecting our business units to be experts on Skype for Business Online, but you are. And as we see, and we see as we go through, we work through this presentation, that there are strategies that you can apply to stimulate the conversation and flow of ideas. And then we finalize the business use case with one of the most important parts, trying to work out with the business units what the expected business outcome of this change to this process would mean, plus looking at documenting some kind of metric that can then be analyzed further offline if needed. This may be in a form of percentage change, an increase, reduction in risk, something that actually makes sense to the business units that are in the room. So now that we've talked through those components, the description of the business process, define the challenges, starting to look at how technology could overcome those challenges and what that expected business outcome would be, let's use that in the context of a worked example. So this is a worked example for Contoso. So Contoso have basically got a facilities team, and they are responsible for a program of works to rationalize the use of real estate across the company. We find that the starting point is we're starting to understand that there's a current business process that they have that's been causing them some challenges. So the start of that is that they're saying that as part of their planning activities to rationalize real estate, they get together on a twice weekly basis, internal and external teams, and they're planning the office moves. They're understanding the floor plans, they're understanding the utilization of people, but they're working with often very remote teams, people on different buildings, different sites, different connections, different locations. So they're currently really using kind of the sort of plain audio calls today to manage that experience. And then when we started to discuss a little bit more about what they see as the challenges in this process, they're telling us that really the crux of the matter is when working on something like real estate consolidation, there's a lot of floor plans and seating plans, utilization charts that need to be shared amongst the team. And there's need for a very visual connection to materials being shared across this geographically dispersed team that comprises many companies. So, the challenge statement uncovers some of the business impact of this, that they're missing out on key information, it's impacting the office move schedule, and potentially they're having to pay additional rent or additional lease costs to space they cannot move into, or they're moving out to buildings late, which means they're going to continue to pay money that they otherwise would have been able to save. So then we start to look at, well, how could technology improve these? Well, they've listened to us, we've heard about this concept of internal, external teams. We've heard about the context of visual and documents are very important to this. So we started to investigate with this, okay, well, what about an easy to schedule experience that allows internal people to share documents and screens from a variety of devices, looking at much more of an inclusive approach. And also one of the key things that came out of the conversation was actually, well, there are a number of people that can't attend these sessions. So recording this and posting it would make it very easy for everybody to go back and review. So we start to get this idea of where this technology can help overcome some of the challenges they've looked at. But then we get on to the most important part here, which is really, what is the expected business outcome? What are they going to get from doing this? And the things that they picked out in this, looking at the facility teams, is that they believe that having people in sync more, being able to have meetings where that visual content is there to be accessed and people on many different devices out on customer sites, is that effectively it keeps them in sync a lot more. It means that they reduce the risk of not meeting their deadlines. When we sort of pushed a bit further on this, then we understood what meeting their timelines mean. And they were saying that potentially there could be the ability to reduce overspend on empty space. And they were kind of estimating between 5 and 10%. And it's at that kind of level of estimation we need to get to with these sample use cases. So we've got a description of the business process. We've got the challenges that they're facing. We can talk about how the technology can start to help overcome those challenges. And then we get, what is that expected business outcome? Now, hopefully what you're seeing is that this, this is the kind of output at this level. We said at the beginning of this, we're not going into great depth. We want something that's high level and very simple and clear to discuss through and to work through. And as you can see from this one side summary of the position, we position the challenge, the opportunity, and the outcome. This is very consumable and easily be shared either verbally as a story or via the slide information. And we find that it's these business use cases, these stories, that really help capture the imagination of the end users and share how this implementation will benefit them. And this type of story, this type of information is also very powerful when we think about adoption and helping to change that delivery model so that actually the business users understand how this is going to change the way they work and move this from a pull model, basically, from a push model. So now that you've got a good understanding of the components of the business use case and how that will help you in engaging to help guide the conversations with business users. So we often find that the output of these workshops is widely shared in the organization. And one or two things starts to happen. Other business units within the organization look at the outcome and go, actually, that's either directly applicable to me, which is great, or maybe what they want to do is they want to rerun some of these sessions to be able to get something that is much more personal to their organization. So hopefully we've given you a good indication of why to engage with these business use case piece of work. So what I'd like to do now is to spend the next kind of 25, 30 minutes talking about how you actually prepare for this and how you go through and execute this. So let's look at the workshop delivery overview itself. As we said, this workshop is delivered as part of the Skype operations framework in the envisioning phase. So it's an early workshop that we recommend you run. And the reason being is that those business use cases, stroke stories, can be very powerful in helping to shape how we go about some of our architectural decisions as we've gone down the line. But the way that we run this specific workshop is that we would prepare, and we estimate about 2 to 4 hours worth of preparation. Delivery, again, between 4 to 8 hours, depending on the number of people in the room and depending on whether you want to run this once or twice in a day. And finalization, again, another sort of 2 to 4 hours worth of work. So that gives you an idea of the kind of the time that we're looking at to go away and execute this type of workshop. So let's spend a little bit of time thinking about what we do within that preparation phase. So to prepare to deliver the workshop, there are a number of key tasks you need to undertake. So obviously the first thing to do is to review this training and download the workshop materials from skypeoperationsframework.com. We suggest that you gain a good working outcome of the business strategy and research some of the Skype video materials that we use as part of this engagement. Meeting the sponsor is a key part of this to check your understanding of the business strategy and the key points that will resonate with the business users, as well as taking the sponsor's steer on which business units and main contacts to engage with. Good sponsor could be the CIO, IT director, CEO, as typically these roles have great insights and connections into the business units. So then the key point about this is to agree the prime material, and this is key because this is how we get our business units to start to think about their processes within the context of Skype for Business. So we agree the prime materials to be used, lock on the session location and date. And then we ask the sponsor's team, and that's very important, to send out the invites and keep us informed or keep you informed of acceptances. Typically, when we're looking to run these business use case workshops, we're looking for about 5 to 10 people in the room. Anything less than that, and sometimes it's difficult to spark the conversation. Anything more than that, it becomes quite interesting to manage. So 5 to 10 is quite a good level. So let's dig into the preparation materials in a little bit more detail. So we talk about this idea of a key part of preparation, which is to understand that business strategy. We'll provide some examples to use in discussions of where the capabilities of Skype for Business Online could be brought to bear. And you'll bring your insights to the table to start the discussions, which helps build confidence and engagement with the attendees. It also really does help build a bridge with those business users when you have spent the time to understand what their environment is like, undertake this analysis, and provide some of your own initial insights. So maybe, for instance, your growth strategy involves hiring and investing in your people. And that's something that you've read from the company website, or that's something that you know is the company strategy. An insight might be something related to the native integration between Skype and Skype for Business would make it easier to interview people, save on travel, time, costs for all concerned. Or perhaps the challenge in the organization is that workers are retiring who are taking valuable practical experience with them of operating machinery and managing controls and various key processes. So maybe enabling Skype for Business brown bag lunches across the organization would help to share and store the knowledge for future use. And you can imagine there are many examples like that. Obviously, they are going to be relevant and pertinent to the organization that you're currently working in or with. And one of the things that we encourage you to do is to build up that kind of library of these for your own use. So how do we get these insights, I hear you ask? It's all very well, Lester, you telling us about this, but where does the insight come from? So what we're trying to put on this slide is a number of places that we think are a good start to look at for the organization. So, one of the things we look at really is, looking at their mission statements and also potentially things like investor reports on the main site. Those can be a very useful set of information, as well as potentially town hall meetings if you have access to those, or reviewing analyst reports of the organization. So getting that kind of nice 360-degree view. What does the organization think of itself? What does the industry think of the organization? What's the industry itself doing? And what is the kind of external view of the organization if that's available? Now, in addition, you may already know about the market segment. You may be working in this organization, so you know all about that market segment and the challenges being faced across the segment. So being prepared to talk about these areas really helps to make the connection with the sponsor and the business users. And one good source at this point is to request a company breakdown of what business units there are in the organization and also understand their main focus points. So you can start to understand potentially how collaboration takes place in that organization. So we mentioned earlier in this session that we're not expecting the business users to be experts on Skype for Business Online, but that they will be working in the workshop to apply Skype for Business capabilities to their identified processes. So how do we achieve this? Well, we achieve this now by the following. So we recommend that now you have a good understanding of the business mission strategy. That one of the great ways we found of getting people engaged and being able to share in a rapid fashion some ideas of the context of how this technology could be applied, that you review the great videos posted to the Skype for Business channels. And I'll give you some examples in a minute. There's a wide range of case studies and introductory videos that provide a great overview of how Skype for Business can be used in the context of a working day. The videos we're looking at here are not so much the kind of how-to videos. There's loads of great ones on how to send an email and how to make a call. But there's some great videos that are made about the context. So they focus more on the business process and how people use the technology than necessarily on the features and focus themselves. So our view is that you carefully curate 2 or 3 of these 2 to 3 minute videos, taking your knowledge of the mission statement of the organization, understanding information relating to that market segment. And then you're going to agree those relevance of those videos with the sponsor. So sitting, playing those videos, getting the sponsor's view around which are the most relevant ones for the organization. And what the sponsor is going to do is they're going to send those videos to the workshop attendees ahead of time. And we found that that's a great way to start the attendees thinking about their work processes and thinking how to apply what they saw in the videos to their day-to-day business processes. In our experience, that makes it much easier for the workshop attendees to prepare. It doesn't require an awful lot of their time, but we cannot share how important it is to do this. The sharing and videos of the sharing and viewing of the videos helps to build that bridge of understanding that is key to thinking of how to apply this technology. So a couple of the go-to videos that have worked quite successfully in conversations with this is a couple of examples here on the Skype for Business YouTube channel, Skype for Business Make Amazing Happen, and the Skype for Business Vision for the Future. The Make Amazing Happen one is very interesting because what it shows is it basically talks about the scenario where you've got internal and external teams collaborating on a fairly time-crucial project and engagement, which we found can translate very nicely to many of our customer and business user interactions. The Vision for the Future one is again a slightly wider set of engagements, and these I suppose are our personal go-tos that we use. There are many more. We encourage you to review that YouTube channel, and the link was on the previous slide, which we can make available. It's there, part of the download deck that you download, to really use these videos to tee up the contextual understanding of what Skype for Business could be doing for your organization. Now, the idea behind this is that once we show that, we ask people to think about these videos in the context of what they do on a day-to-day basis and start to make some very initial notes around the business processes that they believe could be impacted or could be improved by this type of capability. So once you've done your preparation, you've now got a good idea of the key mission strategy for the organization. You've chosen 2 or 3 videos you're going to use as samples. The next thing then is to schedule the call with the sponsor. This is a key call because what you're doing here is you're really sense checking that the insights that you've prepared and the videos that you've chosen will resonate with their business users. So what we do with this is we run the sponsor through the workshop agenda, which we'll get to in a minute. We basically, because the sponsor is key to work with to drive business users' attendance at the workshop. We recommend that you do run these sessions with business users rather than just IT, so you can gain those deep insights into how users could change key processes and unlock benefits. So when you plan the sponsor meeting, you will need to determine and confirm that the sponsor has those connections, or whether they're going to help you broker a meeting or broker the connections with business unit leads to explain what you're looking to achieve and who you need to attend. So we recommend this kickoff call is no more than 30 to 60 minutes in length. And what you're doing is you're sharing some of the insights you've really gathered with the sponsor to confirm if these are correct. Give the sponsor the opportunity to be able to confirm or to tweak or to guide to make sure that those insights, initial insights you're sharing, will be reasonable. Discuss the process and then lock on the videos to use. Which business units are going to be invited and whom in the sponsor's organization will send the invites out. So we also find it's worthwhile when you start to think about planning the date of the business use case workshop, that if you can get agreement of the sponsor to come and kick the workshop off and attend at the end for the review, that can really help to focus the activities in the room. So the next thing we do is once you've had a successful meeting with the sponsor is to, and you've got a list of people, send out the invite. So what we've done is we've given you a sample workshop invitation template to use. Again, the idea behind this is please feel free to customize this as well, but we're actually saying in here why you've been invited, what's going to happen, what the prerequisites are, and it's very key down the bottom to create those 2 little links, video link 1, video link 2. When we talk about the videos, remember the videos are here to help the business users start to think about how to use this technology in context. It's important that we don't really send more than 2. Our experience has been that 2 is people will normally watch the first one, so put the most relevant one at the top. If they found that interesting, they might click on the second one, but beyond that, typically people will only look at 1 or 2. So be really, spend the time with the sponsor to really get it down so you understand of the videos you've chosen, which are the 2 most important ones, and put the most impactful one first. That tends to be how that tends to work. Okay, so the preparation is done. The invites are sent. The next step is to get ready to deliver the workshop. Excited? Well, we hope so, because this is a great way of getting really good interaction with those business units. So what we're going to do for the next part of this presentation is we're going to use the actual delivery deck to walk through what you need to do to understand what happens in each of the sections, understand some of the key talking points, then understand where you move on to the next piece. So at a very high level approach to this, when we look at this delivery aspect, and we can either be 4 or 8 hours, sponsor's going to run through the session objectives to kick the session off. We're going to effectively talk about the format for capturing ideas. We will replay those primer videos so that those people that saw the videos get a little memory boost to how that might impact and work through their processes. We facilitate roundtable discussions to get an idea for what we just seen in the videos, which business processes might those be applicable to, and start to get those at least bulleted out. And then we split into small working groups of 2 or 3 people, and they brainstorm and start to complete the business use case. To start to think about, let's define that description of what they're doing in a little more detail, get down some of the challenges they're working with, look at how the technology they've just seen could potentially impact those business processes, and what some of those real measurable benefits might be. Once we've done that, we then effectively do a report out where everybody gets to present back, and we get feedback from the wider team so that everybody's idea has had a chance to be aired, feedback has been applied, and we can gather and then finalize those. So let's have a look at the workshop materials themselves. So this, as we said, is part of the envisioning workshop process. So typically we would recommend you to run a discovery workshop or an envisioning kickoff workshop before we get to the business use cases. We know that some people are going to run this as a standalone activity. That's fine. But as we said before, please make sure that you've got at least got a reasonably good idea to understand what the strategic objectives are for the wider project. So you can put the reason for the business use case workshop into context. And then after that business use case workshop, we would obviously go into architecture planning, adoption, execution planning, and so forth and so forth. So let's look at the workshop agenda itself. So we have proposed that this workshop would take place generally in a half-day period. Now, again, these are suggestions. We know that some organizations may want to spend longer on this. Some organizations may want to run this back to back. A half-day session in the morning, half-day session in the afternoon. Some may want to run it remotely as shorter sessions with smaller number of working groups. But effectively, the key thing that we need to go through is make sure that we run through these agenda items, which is the sponsor briefing, scene setting, reviewing the sample use cases. Roundtable discussion, and we say it takes about 45 minutes to have that roundtable discussion. And then give people about 45 minutes to break into their working groups. That's where they're going to capture the use cases. They're going to identify any follow-up actions, and they may be looking at if any sort of organizational blockers may exist, and potentially some mitigation approaches. And then we finalize that half day with presenting those use cases back to all attendees, and agree on the next steps and date for finalized business use cases. So that's an idea of the agenda. So it typically takes about half a day. Some organizations may want to run it as 2 half days. Some organizations may want to run it as 1 day. Some people may want to run it as individual hour sessions with different business units. Those are all possible ways of chopping this up, but here's some examples for you. So as we start the workshop, one of the key things we want to find out is who do we have in the room? And it's very important that basically we ask people to present themselves, and we basically ask them to share the role they have in the company. What business unit, what team they're part of, and also in a little bit, sometimes also sharing what other roles they may have had in the past. Because one of the things that we might find is that we've had people in these sessions who said, well, my current role, I could see that we could use this for X, Y, and Z. But actually in my last role, I could see that it would also be very useful for these whole other areas that we know exist within the wider organization, just that's not my team will be doing it. Effectively, it's a good idea to get an idea of the basically for the type of role someone has, and also get expectations of that session. So hopefully during the introductory email, we set the scene. This is about creating and being a part of generating these business use case business use cases. So it's very much an active part rather than a passive part for this. So once we've done the introductions, next thing we look at is basically to just run through the objectives. And as we've talked about in the first few slides of this session, this is really about working with those business units to get a good high-level set of use cases that describe how the organizations and users will benefit from this Skype for Business Online deployment. And we can say to us, hey, where are these use cases going to be used? Well, they're going to be used to help us understand the capabilities that are going to be required for this system. They will potentially be used as inputs into key success indicators. Some follow-on technical decisions may be influenced by these. And definitely there's an input into adoption and change management planning. As we said, one of the things that will be very much useful from a project perspective is using this business focus to have a much more interesting conversation when we start to get into some of the implementation details. And then from the business perspective, it helps them to really understand how this technology could be applied to where they work and then move that forwards. The next thing we walk into in the deck perspective is we then start off with the sponsor briefing. So this is where the sponsor kicks off the session to really talk about a recap of the high-level business goals. What is the high-level project company looking to achieve? And then really talking through from the senior management level, potentially, why the company is looking at this technology change. So providing that kind of broad overarching view of why this is something that the organization is engaging with. And also it's key at that point, the sponsor is setting the expectations. This is very much an interactive session. And it's around thinking about the business outcomes, thinking about how do people identify and measure those. And to really kind of say that this output is to not go away for months and months and months, but in the room to define how this change is going to deliver positive, significant positive business benefits, and capturing 5 to 6 business use cases during the session itself. So at that point, most of the attendees are hopefully engaged and they're interested. And what you would tend to do is you would run them through the business use case format. So exactly the same way that I've just run this through. And remember that you have access to this training and have access to the recording. So if you want to get a little bit more detail and be able to talk a little bit more about each of these points, please feel free to review that training material that we talked about just 15 minutes ago. So again, it's around describing the current business process, high-level bullet points, high-level title, 2 or 3 bullets, but able to find those challenges at that same level. Thinking about, based on the information that they've viewed in the sample videos, potentially how that technology can help overcome those challenges. And then to really think about, and this is obviously the hard part in many cases, and the part that does take more conversation, is around what could that expected and very measurable business outcome be if those challenges are overcome. So if you think about our sample that we talked about earlier on, I would also suggest that you walk the people in the room through that business use case sample and explain to them, here is a sample business use case, Contoso facilities. And explain to them that this is basically what the facilities team are doing for planning. This is the challenges that they're finding with the process because they have this need for a very visual, real-time ability to everybody to see the plans and the materials. What they believed could be a way of improving that, a meeting, allowing internal and external people to share documents and screens. Not really talking about too much technology, it's more about what is the experience that they're looking to have that could help overcome those challenges. And then really starting to look at that expected business outcome. So coming back and saying that this is meeting our timelines, reducing overspend, those kind of things that actually start to become something that is actually measurable. And again, there may be some follow-on refinement, but the key bit is to try and at least get a view for what those measurable expected business outcomes could be. So then what we do is to want to recap people, now that we've got the idea of this is what we're trying to create in the session, that they're going to work together to create these business use case videos. We want to again recap on the art of the possible. So again, I would suggest re-showing the videos that you sent in the initial piece, asking people just to make a note on their scratch paper about some of the business processes that they are engaged in on a day-to-day basis. So really get people to do immediate thoughts. As they're watching the videos, get people to really make some very high-level notes down around just the business processes. We can come back to the challenges and the technology and the outcome, but just get them to identify some of those. So once we've watched the video, then we get into that sort of first 45-minute roundtable discussion. So this really is that we need to engage all attendees in this. We want people to be sharing the experiences. And going into that roundtable discussion related to where the attendees could see opportunities. So we kind of asked them sometimes to start on their first thoughts. We asked them to start to identify those activities and processes and think about this within a number of different contexts, within the role context, within the business unit context, wider within the company. So an area that they know and they interact with that may not be specific to their business unit, but still could be something that's very powerful. And then take it into the interaction they have with their own customers and the interactions they have with their partners and start exploring how some of those processes potentially could be improved or could be enhanced. Now, we see typically a number of interesting ideas formed at this point, and it's key to make sure that we actually start to document those and at least get them down. So these could be improved support for large scale broadcast, or one of the things we talked about was how to improve remote patient care. These are sort of things that come out of this level of roundtable discussion. So this is your primer point. The idea would be, as a facilitator, you're taking some of these down, maybe you're transferring them to a whiteboard so that we've got a nice list or backlog of processes to look at for the next part of the engagement. So the next piece, what we're doing is we're basically then getting people and probably taking them into groups of 2 or 3 people, maybe on a business unit basis. Maybe you mix people up between business units to stimulate conversation, and they pick one of those current business processes, use the use case templates we talked about earlier on, and then they draft the use case. Again, facilitator's role really is to walk around the room, helping people, giving people some guidance potentially, using open-ended questions to really start to understand how you dig out and how you start to complete those. And again, what we would probably suggest you do is print out a few copies of the template, give people some whiteboards, marker pens, and help them to basically start to create some of these ideas. And when we think about refining the use cases, really qualify and think about the expected business outcome pieces of this. So at the end of that 45-minute session, what we hope is that you've got a good set of business use case candidates. Our experience has, between 5 to 6 is a reasonable number to expect if you've got, say, 3 groups of 3 people in the room. More people might give you slightly more, slightly less, but 5 to 6 is a reasonable perspective. What we're then doing is we then move into the final parts of the session, which is the playback session. So what we're doing now is, and again, you may decide how you want to do this based on your connection with the group. Either the facilitator presents this back, so presenting about the use cases and adding feedback, or you may find that each team presents back. And the idea really is to give everybody an opportunity to provide feedback, provide extra information. And from the audience perspective, the people who are listening to each of the use cases, it's kind of been able to reaffirm, was that of interest? Think about how this could apply to your team, even if it was delivered by another team. What additional feedback could you give? Are there any new use cases that you suddenly thought of based on what you've just heard? And also potentially feedback on that measurable business outcome is going to be absolutely key to that. So at the end of this session, I can imagine in your mind's eye, you're thinking about what you've actually got from this point. So what you've now got is you've probably got a number of whiteboards. You've probably got maybe OneNotes, or maybe basically big post-it notes. And now what the idea is to make sure that you're gathering all of these in. We don't want to make sure any of these get lost in whatever state they're in, because they can all be used for additional backlog, additional information, and potentially if there's some of them that somebody got really passionate about but wants some more time to complete, we can tidy those up and send it out to them to complete it and send it back. So if there are any use cases that people want a bit more time to go away and look at, then agree by when you're going to get them back, who's going to work with them, and make sure you're going to get all those back, because you're going to want to basically use those as the follow-on stages during envisioning. I would, my guidance around this, or our guidance around this, is to make sure that you try and get as many of these completed as you can in the session, because then they're immediately applicable. But they may need some bit of tidying up and putting back into the template format that we shared as part of the presentation. So that's over the end of that. You've got a very good view for the business use cases. You've managed to collect 5 or 6 business use cases from the business users, and these are going to be very useful to help gain sponsorship, to help with the business unit buy-in, to help move from a pull to push type approach, and also being able to have those more contextual conversations later on. I would finish the session off by just looking at, typically you just let people know where you are, but the next bit is architecture planning as you go through. But then, the final part of this, the final sort of 2 to 4 hours efforts, is potentially taking all of those pictures, screenshots, photos that you've taken, writing them back up into that business use case format, asking any additional outcome, and then presenting those back to the sponsor in a final kind of half-hour session, so that sponsor has an opportunity to understand and decide how they want to reuse those and share those throughout the rest of the organization. Because typically we find that there's a lot of interest in the business use cases, and this is something that will start to appear a number of places in the organization. You'd be quite surprised where they turn up, in my experience anyway. Okay, so let's think a little bit more. So we finished the workshop, we've written up the use cases, we've now got a very good view, but I wanted to sort of finish the last few minutes of the session talking about facilitator guidance. So obviously, you're going to act as a facilitator to this. You're going to be creating the videos, meeting with the sponsor, doing that initial piece of investigation into the current strategy. So to get you going, download the deck, and it's from skypeoperations.framework skypeoperationsframework.com is where we get the material from. The training is on skypeoperationsframework.com Academy, so you can download this recorded material as well. Use that deck, edit it as you need to run the session. I would ensure that that room has space to work. So make sure there's flipboards, whiteboards, flip charts, those kind of things. Silly stuff. I'd make sure that the videos actually play in the room. Maybe take a slightly larger speaker rather than just playing on a laptop so that people can hear the dialogue and hear the audio. From the point of view of the attendees and as facilitator, active listening is very important. And also encourage people potentially to go a little bit off topic, off piste, because my experience is they typically come back with some really amazing ideas that then the rest of the group go, yeah, that's pretty cool. We'd like to do something like that. I can see how that could be applicable. Now, this is one area that we need to take a lot of care over. Obviously, you've done your research. You've thought about how this type of technology could be applicable to this organization. And there's a very great temptation, if people are struggling, to potentially kind of overshare some of your own ideas. I would typically share one or two ideas to really get the ball rolling. But beyond that, it's about really sort of helping and facilitating the attendees to think about how those ideas might be appropriate and relevant to their own experiences. And this is where potentially you can start to ask, well, think about, the last role that you had in the organization or a previous role in an organization. Where does this start to see if that sparks any ideas? And one that's an absolute key one is make sure you take lots of pictures of work in progress to make sure that you don't end up with a use case that was fantastic, sort of slipping down into the pile and end up being recycled by accident. So there's some good learnings from those points. Okay, so I wanted to just finish off the session with finally just to make sure, recap. I know there's been a few questions about where do people go to get the contents. So all of the slides are available at skypeoperationsframework.com. We would suggest you click on Get Started. In Get Started, there is all the information around the Cloud PBX and Cloud PSTN conferencing offer. So giving you an end-to-end walkthrough of how to use the Skype Operations Framework materials in your deliveries. And obviously part of that delivery is the business use case workshop. For feedback, and feedback is incredibly important for this, there is a link on the Skype Operations Framework website called Give Feedback, or you can go to skypeoperationsframework.com/feedback, and that takes us to our feedback area, where we'd ask you to share your ideas on how we can improve SOF. And again, if there is an idea in there that you like, vote on it. The more votes, the better. And we also ask you to think about this within the terms of the SOF phases, which are plan, deliver, and operate, to help us to understand where the feedback is pointed at. If you've got specific feedback about specific slides, then it's a good idea to kind of tell us that this deck, it's slide this, so we can get very focused on the feedback and understand what we could improve, update. From the point of view of the training environment, we've got the Skype Academy itself. And again, this is again from the front, which is the kind of the learn it aspect of this. We have the readiness, so there'll be, I think, over 17 sessions coming up for SOF V1. There'll be technical product readiness as well, and there's multiple consumption options. You've taken the time to join me in this session live, which I really appreciate, and thank you very much for your time you spent doing this. But for those people that couldn't make it or wish that they want to be able to recap this in the future, then the session will be available. You can download it, review it, watch it, and hopefully find that of use to you. So let's just recap a little bit before we get into Q&A on what the objectives were. So what we've shared is that the business use case workshop really helps to gain sponsorship, align with the business, help you move very much from a push to a pull model, and support those key follow-on project discussions. So this no longer is an IT initiative, it's a business initiative, and the business really want this capability because you've spent the time with them where they have understood how this capability can apply to their business processes. You engage with business use cases during the envision stage of SOF. And again, that really helps you to understand at the beginning and set things up for success. We've talked about how to prepare for and deliver the use case workshop, and you know where to download the materials from. So before we move into the Q&A, I'm just going to hand back to our organizer, who is going to say a few words before we move into the formal Q&A session.
All right, thank you, Lester. All right, audience, before we go into the Q&A, I'd like to bring your attention to a link to a short survey for this web conference. It's in the upper right-hand corner of the video pane that says, please take a short survey. That's a link to a short summary for this web conference. We ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference or have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, this is your chance to let us know. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. And just as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and submit your question in the white text box, either to the right of the video pane or by scrolling down to just below the video pane. I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Lester to enter some Q&A. Lester, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So we've had a few questions that have come in that my colleague Andrew has been curating and looking after. Thank you very much, Andrew. So a couple of the things about when do you actually run this business use case workshop, which is a question that we've had a number of times. So I'll give you my kind of steer on this. We've suggested it runs as part of the envisioning phase of the project, because that's where effectively you are doing a fair amount of heavy lifting work to really lock scope, lock approach, agree the objectives and key results that you would have been heard about in the previous sessions. And one of the questions we get is, hey, well, could you use this during a pre-sales piece? Because effectively what we're trying to do here is to maybe to gain that sponsorship or to gain that business buy-in. And I think yes, you could use this in pre-sales scenario. But effectively, it depends on how much of that envisioning process you want to put in a pre-sales environment, and that's really going to bound to be your call. But again, I would suggest that it's kind of worthwhile considering the level of depth that you're going into, and to consider the level of benefits that the end organization is going to look at from undertaking this business use workshop, to make a decision as to whether or not this is something that is pure pre-sales, whether it's part funded, or whether, if you are a partner, whether you use some of the kind of funding options that are available to undertake some of this initial planning activities. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I mean, we've seen this being delivered both within a pre-sales environment and also post-sales environment, but also remember that this is something that customers may deliver themselves as well. I mean, the idea behind this training is available to all. If you're talking to a customer about this case and they say, hey, that sounds really interesting, there's also the opportunity to ask them to run this themselves with this material, and then effectively to share the results. So there's a number of different ways you could potentially think about approaching this. Another sort of question we had is, does this apply to small customers as well? I think it really applies to business units. So, you can get what some people may call small customers that are a very focused business unit of a much larger organization. I think anybody who is looking to implement Skype for Business online is potentially going to be, changing the way that end users undertake some of their activities and to deliver additional benefits. And as part of that, for those end users to want to onboard and to move to that pull model, they need to understand potentially what benefit this is going to bring to them. So running this type of business use case workshop and basically bringing that to any size of customer or any size of business unit, we believe brings those benefits. And that's why we've kind of sized this as a half-day activity. If you looked at the agenda we put together, it normally takes about half an hour to go through introductions. If you've got 5 people in the room, and to kick it off with the key sessions. It takes a little while to go through the business use cases. It takes a little while to have a reasonably good discussion, which is where we talk 45 minutes for the kind of round table. And it takes about 45 minutes to be able to document those 4 or 5 use cases. So, whatever size the customer, I think that's still a reasonable amount of time to expect to spend really getting a very, very good insight into that organization, and basically to understand how those business processes start to work. I think there's would a TOGAF, one of the questions we had there is, would a TOGAF certified architect benefit for this process? So I'm not a TOGAF expert, and I wouldn't propose to be one, but I would suggest that I would turn that around to say that, at any process in architecture where you're looking to understand how to deliver business benefits through a technology implementation, anything that you can use in your toolkit that helps to basically get a deeper insight into how business users will use this technology and the types of benefits that they could gain from that technology is going to help in your understanding and your mapping of how that implementation would be undertaken within that organization. So I think that's kind of, those are the questions that we had. Again, very happy to take follow-on feedback through our feedback site. So I'm very conscious we're now at the end of the hour. I would like to sort of finish off the session by thanking you very much to everyone who has attended and your comments and for listening. Please feel free to download the materials afterwards. We'd love to hear your feedback on how you're using Skype for Business. And thank you to the production team, Janice, Holly, and Andrew who's helping out with the questions. And I hope that's been a useful session for you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Lester. All right, attendees, you may access the web conference recording by a link that will be delivered within 72 hours post-conference. This does conclude today's web conference. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter, Lester Hewitt, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today. You may now disconnect.